So let's do a slightly more complicated example where we're going to modify data. That example was just using a get to get some information. Now we're going to try posting a rating, like how many stars from 1 to 10 do I give this movie? If we look at the developer page again, we'll see that for this one, we have to do a post. The URI has to include the movie ID. We're going to use 62 again, and rating. Why post? Because we're going to cause a side effect. We're going to cause some data to be changed or written, and so a well-designed API will use post for that. And I will show you on the developer site that this is what it's going to spit back. It's going to give us our URL nicely formed, and it's going to give my long token as part of the authorization header. Same thing as before. But the one thing that we don't see in here, we don't see in the URI, is how do I say what the actual number is that I want to supply as a rating from 1 to 10? So how is that actual rating info specified? So let's go back to the developer page and take a look. So here's the API documentation for the add rating for a movie. And just like before, you can see that it's nicely, constructed this URI for me. But if I scroll down to the descriptions of the parameters, okay, movie ID is required. That's 62. We know that now. These things seem like they're optional, but the body params, I'm supposed to supply something called the raw body, and I'm supposed to provide a JSON data structure. So I'm guessing, as a developer, this must somehow be the place where I specify what the value of my rating should be. The question is, what format should it have? And now I'm going to tell you a true digression. I kind of bounced around on the documentation page for a while to try to figure out what this JSON object has to look like that specifies the actual movie rating. After a few minutes of fruitlessly searching, and this is going to be in the recording, I went to ChatGPT. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. So I asked ChatGPT, please show the correct JSON data for an add rating API request to the moviedb.org API. Amazing what we can do these days. As usual, it gave me way more information than I needed, but there's the piece of information I need. It looks like I need to have a JSON data structure that has a single slot called value, and it has a numeric value, presumably from 1 to 10. So with that information in mind, why don't I just grab this? And now, if we go back to the API page for add rating, I can paste in something that looks just like that. And now it's updated my curl command with a way of saying, here's the data I'm going to post. I'm going to send this as the posted data. It's just this raw JSON data structure packed onto one line. We're going to copy it. We're going to go to a terminal window, and we're going to try it out. Success true. Yay. So the item was updated successfully, which means I have now rated, for the 25th time in my life, 10 out of 10 for 2001: A Space Odyssey. So what's sort of the takeaway from that? There's a couple. One of them is API documentation is sort of a life skill. And I realize we're going to have to wrap up here in a moment. We'll sort of do a little debrief on this on Thursday. But API documentation is really a life skill. Learning how to read an API. Some of those API pages will have that little embedded thing where you can sort of copy paste the curl command. Others are not so nice, and you kind of have to manually construct that command yourself, save it in a file so you can use it over and over again. But sort of experimenting your way around the API, using things like ChatGPT and Stack Overflow to figure out the parts that are not obvious from the API docs, because sometimes those docs are not complete. Those are sort of life skills. And these days, it's rare to build a non-trivial SaaS app that doesn't have some sort of integration with some sort of microservice. So we'll get a lot more used to doing this as the course goes on, but hopefully this gives you sort of an introduction. Like, this is what life is like when you're doing API calls, JSON. This is we're in the guts of the SaaS world.